Hey everyone, so it is June, which means we are almost halfway through the year. I feel like the year is flying by so quickly, and whenever June rolls around, I like to do some mid-year update videos. So I already filmed a video on the worst makeup products that I've tried this year. I'll link that video in the description box below if you want to check it out. Later this week, I have a video coming on the best products that I've tried this year, but today I wanted to sit down and talk about all of the palettes that I've tried in 2022 so far and do a mid-year ranking. So I'm going to rank these from the worst all the way up to the best. And to be honest with you, I don't have a lot of palettes at either end. There are a few palettes that I've tried that are absolute fails that I regret buying, and then a few that are exceptional that have really become staples in my routine. But a lot of them fall right in the middle. Like, there are a lot of good palettes I've tried that aren't necessarily absolute favorites, but I still think are nice options. So just keep that in mind. There aren't a ton at either end of the extreme, but let's just jump into it and I'll share my thoughts on these products. There are two palettes at the bottom of my list. Actually, if you watched my video on the worst makeup products of 2022, you've already heard me mention these, so you might want to skip ahead a few minutes. But coming in at number 14, I have this one from e.l.f. It is the bite-sized eyeshadow palette in Orange Dreamsicle. I love the bite-sized palettes. I've tried pretty much all of them at this point, and I think the quality is really nice, but this one doesn't feel like the typical bite-sized palette quality. It's very powdery, it's a little bit dry. As I blend the shadows on my eye, they all kind of mesh into one color, and there's not a whole lot of variation within the palette. I mentioned this in my video where I shared the worst makeup products, but it doesn't look anything like the product photo online. I don't know if they originally had a different version of this or if they really enhanced the photo, but it looks like a completely different palette. When I got this in person, I thought maybe they sent me the wrong palette, but it's very light, really soft. And like I said, the quality just isn't as great as their other palettes. It's a $3 palette, so obviously it's not the end of the world if it's not my favorite formula. I do feel like the first shimmer in here is pretty. I'll use it as like an inner corner highlight, but overall, I just feel like it doesn't match up with their other bite-sized palettes. So I was disappointed when I got this one in the mail, and I just don't use it because there's no variation within the palette. All of the shadows look super similar on the eyes, and a lot of them just kind of blend away to nothing because it is such a powdery formula. At number 13, I have the Urban Decay Wild Greens. I've talked about this a lot on my channel, so I won't spend a ton of time on this. I will say there are people who really enjoy this palette, and as with everything, it totally comes down to personal preference. If you do like lighter, softer shadows, then you might enjoy this one. This one is definitely not as bad as the e.l.f. palette, but it shouldn't be because it is a $44 palette. This was actually on sale for 50% off on Sephora and Ulta's websites. If it is still available, I'll link it below because I do think at the $22 price tag, it makes more sense. The original $44 price tag is just too high for what you get in this palette. The quality just isn't there. Even if you do like a softer, more subtle shadow, some of these shadows are a little bit patchy, they're hard to work with, but I think at $22, you know, if this has been pulling you in a little bit, if you've seen some reviews and you feel like it would be a good option for your collection, then I feel like that's more of a fair price point. I think the color story is really pretty. I like that they combined the greens with the warm orangey reds. You get a few browns, and I know, again, some people disagree with me, but I just find it to be very underwhelming. The shimmers in here are pretty, but that's pretty much where it ends. The matte shadows lack pigment. They're hard to blend out, some of them, and I don't like it, to be honest with you. So that's why this one is at number 13. Those are the only two palettes I tried this year that I would consider to be regrets or fails. I'm going to kind of move into palettes that I think are good, but they're not necessarily exceptional palettes in my collection. If you like the color story, then they might be worth trying, especially because a lot of these are just nice, affordable options if you don't want to spend a ton of money, but they aren't necessarily the standout palettes of 2022. So at number 12, I actually have 3 palettes from ColourPop. I just feel like the formula is so similar between these 3, and ColourPop's formula can be consistent, but I feel like based on the packaging, it can kind of change as well. So they've been doing these 9-pan cardboard palettes for a long time, but these are a little bit bigger. They used to have some that were slightly smaller, and I feel like those were even different than these. I just ranked these together because honestly, I think if I was going to rank one a little bit higher, it would just come down to color story. And I like them all for very different reasons, but I would say I like them equally. So the first one is the ColourPop in the Limelight palette. This one is kind of unique to my collection. A lot of the green palettes I have are like deeper greens, forest greens, emerald greens. So I do like this one on days where I do want like a lighter, softer, brighter look, especially if I'm doing like a pop of color on the inner corner, which I think is kind of a fun trend, a fun way to incorporate color. The matte shadows aren't super intense. They're definitely lighter, softer, buildable shadows. Same with the shimmers. They're more like satin shimmers rather than true intense metallics, but that might be something that appeals to you if you do like a softer, buildable palette. The next one is the All Amethyst palette. This one is a purple toned palette, and again, it's a little bit different than the other purple ColourPop palettes I have in my collection. I do have It's My Pleasure. I also have Lilac You a Lot. They have more berry toned ones, but this one is like a lighter pastel, not quite lavender palette, because all of the purples in here are so different that I wouldn't characterize them as lavender. I would say it's a cooler toned purple palette, and when I use this, I definitely get like softer purple looks overall. Nothing too intense. I think the shimmers in here are really pretty, but I'm not usually reaching for this when I want a really dramatic look. The last one is Apricot Me Not. I probably use this one the most out of the three, but that's because it is more of a neutral palette. It's very warm toned, very orangey, and I think it's been a lot of fun as we head into summer. So I have reached for this one quite a bit. But again, the shimmers are not as metallic as shimmers in other ColourPop palettes. They feel more like, not dry, but like a softer satin finish. If you've tried a lot of ColourPop palettes, you probably know what I mean. They have really rich, intense shadows like the ones you find in the Raw Beauty Christie palette, or like even the ColourPop monochromatic palettes. The shimmers in there are super intense, and then they also have lighter, softer shimmers. So if you're someone who likes a lighter, softer, buildable palette, these are the palettes for you. If you're looking for really intense, saturated color, skip over these. I rank them a little bit lower because I'm not reaching for them quite as much as other palettes in my collection, but I do think they are a solid option if you like a softer palette. Coming in at 11, I have these two 6-pan palettes from Essence. Essence released a bunch of 6-pan palettes last year, and I do have all of them in my collection. I don't think I've decluttered any of them. And then this year they came out with these two. Now I do use these a good amount. This one is Nothing Compares to Nude. It comes with 6 neutral, softer shadows. And there is a little bit of like a smokier shade right in the center, but typically I get a very light, soft look when I use this. The other one is My Rose Will Go On, which again comes with 6 softer pink tone shadows. So the reason why I'm ranking these a little bit lower is because I don't feel like there's as much variation within these palettes as there is within their other 6-pan palettes. Their other 6-pan palettes have a mix of like lighter, softer shades and deeper, dramatic shades. So I do feel like you could do something very subtle or kind of do something a little bit more smoky toned. With these, you're really just doing something pretty soft and subtle. That could really appeal to you depending on your makeup style. And again, I have been wearing really soft eye makeup these days for day-to-day wear, so I do reach for these a good amount. And I find that the shadows are easy to work with because they are buildable. You're not going to, have a soft eye makeup look in mind and then all of a sudden end up with something super smoky like I have on today, because I do feel like that happens with other palettes. I don't think these are the best quality palettes or they have the best color stories out of all of the 6-pan palettes they've done, but I do use them a good amount. I think they have a place in my collection for sure. Number 10 is a little bit of a newer palette to my collection. This is from Jason Wu. It is the Desert Rose Eyeshadow Palette. So they have a couple of different color stories. This is the only one that I've tried. It comes with 9 neutral shadows. This is definitely one of the softer color stories. I saw that they do have some deeper options on Target's website, but I haven't tried them. So I'm just speaking to the quality of this one. It comes with 6 matte shadows, 3 shimmers, and again, it's just a nice everyday palette. I feel like my makeup style has changed a lot over the past year, and I used to pretty much only love shadows that were super pigmented, really intense on the eyes, and that's just not the case anymore. This isn't the most exceptional palette that I've ever tried, but it's a nice option for day-to-day wear because you know what you're going to get out of it. You can just create a quick, easy look, nothing too over the top, just something soft and subtle. The matte shadows apply well, the shimmer shadows apply well too. I think overall it does feel a little bit more dry compared to other palettes I've tried, and I do tend to prefer a slightly creamier formula, but I wore this one a ton during the month of May, like pretty much every time that I wore eyeshadow. So it really is a nice option when you just want something quick and easy. The next few palettes I'm going to share with you guys are, again, still really good palettes, but I feel like these have one or two things that set them apart that make them a little bit better than the ones I just shared with you, or I tend to reach for them a little bit more. So coming in at number 9, I have the Milani Gilded Flora palette. I really like this palette. I think this was the first palette that I tried in 2022, and I still enjoy it. I haven't tried a ton of Milani palettes recently, so I'm not sure how this compares to their other Gilded palettes because they do have quite a few options, but the reason why I purchased this is because I just thought it was such a fun color story. There's a really beautiful mix of purples and pinks, and I also love the golds in here, the neutrals. It is a powdery palette, so don't get me wrong, if you don't like powdery shadows, you're not going to like this one, and I do think that there are other matte formulas that are better than this, but because it is such a powdery formula, I find that it's so blendable on the eyes. And if you're someone who is typically intimidated by color, especially like those really intense, colorful matte shadows that can be a little bit difficult to work with, this could be such a good option for you because it is a blendable, buildable formula. So if you want to do a pink toned look or a purple toned look, or even something with that really fun yellow, you don't have to worry about going in with too much and then having a hard time blending it out. You can start off really soft, really subtle, and then gradually work your way up. And the reason why I like the shimmers is because they're super lightweight, but they just look so interesting on the eyes. I just apply them with my finger all over the lid, and they're nice because they're really lightweight, so you can layer them together and build them up and kind of create your own custom look. And I just have a lot of fun with this. Whenever I wear this palette, I feel like I get a lot of compliments, and I do really like this palette. I don't think it's, the best quality palette that I've ever tried because it is powdery, the shadows are a little bit more subtle, but if you're intimidated by color or you're a beginner when it comes to colorful shades, this is such a great option to try. At number 8, I have another one of the e.l.f. bite-sized eyeshadow palettes. This one is I Love You a Latte. So I got this one at the same time that I got the Orange Dreamsicle palette because they released them together. And again, this one does not look like the promo photos. The promo photos make this one look a little bit deeper, more saturated, and it's definitely lighter and softer in person. But even still, I think there is more variation within this quad compared to Orange Dreamsicle. I think this is the only bite-sized palette that has all matte shadows. So you get 4 matte neutral shadows. I've used this palette quite a bit. You can see that I've hit pan on the first shadow. I'm pretty close to hitting pan on the second shadow as well. And that just doesn't typically happen for me because I have so many palettes that I like to rotate. But I use this one a lot because it has just everyday neutral shadows. So typically I'll take the center shadows, I'll use the warmer one if I want more of a warm toned look, the cooler one if I want more of a cool toned look, and just use those as a crease shadow. And then if I do want more of a dramatic look, I'll pull in the dark brown as a liner or an outer corner color. The first shade is so perfect to set my eyeshadow primer or to use as a brown bone highlight, and then I'll just pair it with like a ColourPop Super Shock shadow to complete the look. I'll also use this alongside of other palettes that might be missing like some of my staple shadows, and I think it's perfect. The matte formula is very, very easy to work with, and because it is such a lightweight formula, I find that it works really well to blend out other shadows. If I have a shadow that looks a little bit patchy on the eyes, I'll just take one of these on a brush and just kind of layer it on top, and it just makes everything look really smooth and diffused. At number 7, I have 2 ColourPop palettes. I think these were part of their Celestial collection. They did 3 different 9-pan palettes, and then they also did some So Glassy lip glosses. I really like these. They surprised me because when I saw the initial promo photos, I don't know, I didn't expect to love them. I felt like the color stories weren't super appealing, and I just felt like, I don't know, they had done these before, but I do think the formula is a little bit better than the other 9-pan ColourPop palettes that I mentioned, the ones that come in cardboard packaging. And I do prefer the cardboard packaging. I feel like typically the shadows that come in this clear plastic packaging end up shattering on me. At least if I throw it in a makeup bag or I travel with it, I'll just make sure not to travel with these because I don't want that to happen. But they're just a mix of really nice textures within these palettes. So you do get matte shadows, but you also get a few Super Shock shadows, which that's my favorite formula. And then you get mattes with shimmer in them. You get a couple of like satins, true metallics. So I like that they have so many different finishes within each one of these palettes because it just makes the eye look a little bit more interesting. I think out of the two, my favorite is Coast to Clear, just because it is a little bit more smoky toned. It's a really beautiful cool toned palette. You get neutrals, but you also get a few pinks. And then the other one is Clearly in Love, which is a little bit softer. I don't use this one quite as much, and I will say the shimmers in here are a little bit more subtle than the other one. So if you do like a softer look, this is probably the one to try. But if you're looking for like a good cool toned palette that can pull really soft but also get really dramatic and smoky, Coast Clear is a really good option. I wore this in a video and a lot of you guys couldn't believe I was wearing this palette just because the look I did was super intense and smoky, and then the shadows were so pretty and sparkly on the lid. And it was this palette. Actually, I think I used one shadow from this palette as well, but it was mainly this one. It's such a pretty option. So I do recommend it if you're thinking about it. I don't love this packaging. It's not my favorite, but I'll just make sure not to travel with these or throw these in my makeup bag and just keep them at home where they're a little bit more safe. At number 6, I have the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. I think that this is the prettiest palette that I own in terms of packaging. It is so gorgeous, and I always say that I try not to buy makeup based on packaging, but I have to say nice packaging does kind of elevate the experience a little bit. And I understand why really beautiful packaging appeals to people. Whenever I use this, I love it. I love how it looks. I love how it feels. And I think they did a really good job with the packaging. It really is so pretty. So as for the actual palette, I have to say I use this less than I thought I would. And I'm kind of hoping that changes as the year goes on. I think part of the reason why I don't find myself using this one as much is because I purchased it at the same time that I purchased another palette that I'll talk about in a second, and I've used that palette nonstop. So I just feel like I haven't had enough time to use this one because when I'm doing my makeup, I'm usually reaching for something different for another reason. But when I do use this, I do like how my looks turn out. I think it's nice because you can do like a true neutral look, but you can also do a pink toned look, a purpley look. It is more of a cool toned palette. And I kind of go back and forth on whether I'm really into cool tones, really into warm tones. This year, I think as a whole, I've been a little bit more into warm tones, which is why, again, I haven't used this one quite as much. But typically during the fall and the winter, I kind of go back to cool tones. So I have a feeling I'll end up getting a lot more use out of this in like September, October, November, that time of the year. So that's why I'm ranking it a little bit lower. I feel like it has the possibility to go higher, but also the possibility to go lower if I don't use it more. So let me move on to my top 5. These are definitely my favorite palettes of the year. The first one is a little bit newer to my collection, but I think that this is going to be such a staple for summertime. It's the ColourPop Gettin Fresh palette. I really like these ColourPop Mega palettes, which has surprised me so much because I always say I'm not a big fan of like super large palettes, and that is true, but there's something about these mega palettes that I like. They don't feel quite as big as like other giant palettes from other brands like Morphe. I think it's because they're really sleek, they're very thin, and you can fold the cover all the way around, which just makes a difference as you're doing your makeup. And I like that you get a variety of shadows. You get 30 shadows in here. So if you're someone who likes to have a more minimal makeup collection, I do think that these come in handy because you get a really good range. My favorite ColourPop Mega palette is, I'm completely blanking on the name. When I did my ranking of my 2021 palettes, this one was up near the top and I can't think of it. Oh, it's the ColourPop It's a Mood palette. This one is so gorgeous if you like jewel tones, but I have to say, I think this is such a fun color story for the summertime. I did do a video using this. If you guys want to check it out, I'll link it below. I think that this is a nice way to do a neutral palette with a spin because you get gorgeous warm toned neutrals in here, but you also get a few pops of green and gold. There's like one pop of pink. I think a few more pinks would make it even more fun, but I've just enjoyed it a lot lately, and the quality is definitely there. The matte shadows are like ColourPop's staple mattes, and the metallics are creamy, smooth, really, really gorgeous. So I wanted to rank this one at number 5. Right now, I'm really loving it. I think that it is a really fun color story that's a little bit different than your typical neutral palette. Number 4 is another ColourPop Mega palette. Again, I'm surprised these are so high in my ranking, but I really do find myself reaching for them quite a bit. This one is a nice option if you do like more of a cool toned palette. They do have the Stone Cold Fox palette, which is a cool toned palette, but I like this one because it also pulls in some really pretty pink tones, and it's not overly cool. Like, you definitely get your cool toned silvers and grays, but you also get some more neutral shadows, like neutral undertone shadows. This one does come with a ton of matte shadows, and then kind of like your staple metallics that you would need to complete the look. There are a few pressed glitters in this one, which I did want to mention in case you don't like the pressed glitters, but I do really love the color story. I think, again, it's kind of like a fun spin on a neutral palette, but it's a little bit more toned down if you don't want something too colorful. Okay, so finishing up with my top 3 palettes. These are the standout palettes of the year for me so far. The quality is exceptional. The color stories are gorgeous, and I use these a ton, and I feel like they're unique to my collection, either because of the color story or the formula, and they're just standout palettes. So these are definitely the ones that I wanted to rank the highest that I think are definitely worth checking out for sure. So at number 3, I actually have 2 palettes. These are both from FLORA Beauty. These are not new palettes, but I was late to the game. I just tried them out this year, and I'm so glad that I did. Wait, did I purchase this palette last year? Now I can't remember if I got this near the end of last year or if I got it at the beginning of this year. I just searched my channel to see when I first talked about this palette. I got this one back in January, and then I just got this one during May. So anyway, these are both from FLORA Beauty. These are not new palettes. They're older palettes that I finally tried because you guys, like, I got so many comments on a video from you guys saying that you love these so much and that the shimmer formula is amazing. And I totally agree. If you are a shimmer eyeshadow fan, if you love like a rich, smooth metallic, something really intense, then you have to try these. I don't say that very often, but this is one of the best quality palettes that I've tried, or the best quality formulas. These look like liquid metal on the eyes. I don't have anything bad to say about this formula at all. The only con that I guess I could think of when it comes to these palettes is that I don't typically use them to get a complete look, because I do like to pull in matte shadows for my looks, but I think they are so perfect as a complementary palette. I'll do my makeup, I'll use any matte shadows in my collection, and then take these shimmers and place them on the lid, and they look so gorgeous. Like, these palettes should retail for like 3 times what they retail for because the quality is that good. I don't want them to raise their prices, but I'm just saying, like, these are drugstore palettes that perform like high-end palettes. I think they're a little bit more expensive than other drugstore palettes. I want to say they are like $18, but that comes out to be $3 a shadow, and trust me, this is worth the price tag because the shimmer shadows are just so gorgeous. So the way that I'm raving about these, I feel like they should be number 1. But I do think I use my number 1 palette more than these just because I am able to get true complete looks out of them. But they're so good. They definitely are one of the standout products I tried this year. At number 2, I have one of the prettiest palettes I've ever seen. This is the Heather Austin Adept Cosmetics collab. This is absolutely gorgeous, you guys. Heather did an amazing job on this. I think that this is so unique, but it's just so much fun to wear. It kind of pushes me to be a little more creative, and I used to wear a lot more color on the eyes than I do these days, but when I wear this, I just feel like my makeup looks so pretty. Like, I love how it looks. I just feel a little bit more confident, and I think that's what I miss about wearing colorful eyeshadow, but I think she did such a beautiful job on this. The quality, like I said, is so good. I've never tried Adept Cosmetics before this palette, but I definitely want to try more from them. Typically, I will use the purpley shadows in here because I love purples, and she did such a good job with these. So if you like unique, interesting shimmers, this is the palette to try. The shimmers are super intense. Again, they kind of give you like that liquid metal look, but they are so interesting. Like, there are just the most interesting duochromes in here. I really need to get more into indie shadows and duochromes because I feel like this is what I want out of eyeshadow palettes. Like, I want something unique and interesting and fun to work with. And again, the quality is just top notch. It's amazing. So if you haven't tried this yet, I definitely recommend it. Heather did a phenomenal job on it. It's just one of the best palettes I've tried this year, obviously. It's number 2. My number 1 palette might not come as a surprise to you if you've watched my videos over the last few months because I've talked about this nonstop. It is the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 Rose Eyeshadow Palette. I love this palette so much. I have used it more times than I can count. I have a couple of videos on my channel where I'm using this palette if you guys want to check them out. I truly feel like I've gotten my money's worth out of this palette with the amount that I've used it. It's so gorgeous. I love my makeup every single time I use this. And, you know, if I'm being honest, I do feel like the shimmer shadows in the other 2, or the other 3 that I just mentioned, the Heather Austin one and the 2 FLORA Beauty palettes, are better. I think I prefer this formula, or these formulas, because they're very smooth, really creamy. They look intense on the eyes. So I just want to throw that out there. I'm not saying that the quality of this one is better than the quality of the other 2, but I think this color story And the fact that it does have a lot of matte shadows as well are probably the reasons why I reach for this one a little bit more. Also, it's not a neutral palette, but it's kind of like a, how do I explain it? It's like a rosy palette. It's a little bit more colorful than like my typical everyday neutral eyeshadow looks, but it still pulls more neutral in the end than like a true intense rosy mauve palette. I just really like this palette. It's such a pretty color story, and I find myself reaching for it a ton. I honestly can't put it down. Whether I'm doing something really soft and quick and easy or something a little bit more dramatic, everything just flows together so nicely, and I'm never disappointed by it. So that is my top palette of 2022 so far, and just like my top 3 spots overall. I don't know if they'll change. I'm kind of curious to see if another brand is going to launch something that I end up liking more. I can't imagine they will, because I feel like I'm really happy with these as a whole, and these are definitely like the exceptional standout palettes that I've tried so far. So I would love to hear from you guys. What are your favorite palettes of 2022 so far? What is your number one? Whether it was released this year or it's older, please let me know in the comment section below. And if you guys want to hear about the worst makeup products that I tried, I'll link that video on the screen for you right now, and I'll see you guys very soon with a new one. Bye.